In this video, we're going to be talking about square roots. The square root of a number is a value that, when multiplied by itself, gives the number. The square root of a number is a value that, when multiplied by itself, gives the number. The opposite of squaring a number is taking the square root. The opposite of squaring a number is taking its square root. For example, you have the square root of 9 squared. These two cancel, leaving you with just what's left under the house, which is 9. Let's do the right column together, the even problems. What number gives you 36 when you multiply it by itself? 6, because 6 times 6 is 36. And number 4, 9 times 9 gives you 81, so the square root of 81 is 9. With number 6, pay attention to the negative that's on the outside. So your answer is going to be a negative answer, and the square root of 324 is 18, because 18 times 18 gives you 324. Notice in number 8, they have a square root and a square. Remember, these two cancel each other, leaving you with what's underneath the house. In this case, that is 25. One way you can view this, square root of 25 is 5. Then 5 squared is 25. Number 10. Square root of 361 squared. Same thing. You have a square root and a squared, which give you 361. If you were to actually evaluate this, 361 squared is 130,321. And when you take the square root of this, you get 361. Number 12, negative square root of 144. So your answer is going to be negative, since the negative is on the outside of the square root. The square root of 144 is 12, because 12 times 12 gives you 144. Number 14, notice you have the negative on the outside. So your answer is going to be negative. Remember, a square root and a square, they are opposites. So they do cancel to give you what's left underneath the house. Your final answer will be negative 8. Number 16 is a challenge. Notice the negative is in the house, not outside of the house. In this case, there is no real solution. Anytime you have a negative under the house, okay, that creates no real solution. Pause the video, try the left column, the odd problems. Check your answers with the following problems. Ask your teacher if you have any questions. Let's practice with more square roots and perfect squares. You can use square roots to determine if a number is a perfect square. You can use square roots to determine if a number is a perfect square. If a number is not a perfect square, you can determine the two consecutive whole numbers that the square root falls between. If a number is not a perfect square, you can determine the two consecutive whole numbers that the square root falls between. To be consecutive, has to be an unbroken sequence. For example, 3 and 4. Those are two consecutive numbers. 7 and 8. Those are two consecutive numbers. Now let's talk about integers 1 through 40 to determine whether they are a square root, and if they are not, let's find the two consecutive whole numbers that it falls between. 1. 1 is a square root because the square root of 1 is 1. 2 is not a square root, but it falls between 1 and 2. If you find the square root of 2, your answer will be 1.414, and then it goes on. So it just gives you a best guess. Square root of 3 is not a perfect square, or is not a square root, but it falls between 1 and 2. Square root of 4, the square root is 2, because 2 times 2 gives you 4. Square root of 5 is not a perfect square, but it falls between 2 and 3. Square root of 6 is not a perfect square, but it falls between 2 and 3. Square root of 7 is not a perfect square, but it falls between 2 and 3. Square root of 8 is not a perfect square, but it falls between 2 and 3. Square root of 9 is a perfect square, and it is 3. So you notice your perfect squares of 4, perfect square is 9. All the numbers that are in between 4 and 9 will be 2 point something. It'll be higher than 2 but less than 3. If I look down my list, my next perfect square is going to be 16. The square root of 16 is 4. So all these numbers, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, are going to fall between 3 and 4. Find your next perfect square, and then look at all the in-between numbers. They will fall between 4 and 5. Do this through the integer of 40. Check your answers to see if you got the square roots correct, and then all the 2 consecutive numbers that they fall between correct. Your perfect squares should have been 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, and 36. Ask your teacher if you have any questions.